UFC London returns this weekend as Movsar Evloev looks to try to secure his title shot as he goes up against the streaking Lerone Murphy. Two undefeated fighters going at it. Cannot wait to break down this fight, but more importantly, I cannot wait to see how it transpires. Obviously, I want to see if it goes along with what I'm predicting to happen, but also to see who will be the next number one contender and who will challenge Alexander Volkanovski for the UFC featherweight title. We will find that out this weekend. Just a quick plug, UFC is not the only card that's going down this weekend. Cage Warriors 203 and PFL Madrid, I believe, will go down roughly around the same time on Friday, and I will have breakdowns for both those cards right here on the YouTube channel, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that good stuff. I'm thinking Wednesday, Thursday, I'll be dropping PFL and Cage Warriors, time depending on whenever odds start settling out, and that usually dictates when I will put out these breakdowns for you guys. All right, 14 fights to talk about for this UFC London card, so let's get right into it. First fight up in the women's bantamweight division, we got Melissa Mullins going up against Luana Carolina. Mullins is coming off of a loss to Daria Zelezniakova, a fighter she's already defeated. So recent, you can still see it in her last 5 here, as when she first defeated her, it was under the Aries FC banner where she got her to the ground almost immediately and was able to pummel her to a TKO with 1 second left on the clock in round 1. That eventually earned her shot in the UFC, as we saw her pick up that win over Arina Alexieva. Then she struggled against Nora Kernol in a fight where she missed away very badly, and then obviously her takedowns didn't work out that well for her. She got gassed out and then knocked out in the second round of that fight. Luckily, she was able to get back on track against Claudia Shigula, and then against Daria Zelezniakova. Again, very weird approach from her. She went 3 of 6 on takedowns, but she did not go for the takedowns and grappling approach as often as people expected her to, especially considering the type of advantage she held in that fight. You know, that was a fight where she was a chalky favorite, and one that felt like if she just replicated what she did in the first fight, she would have gotten that win pretty easily. Of course, we have to give some credit to Zelezniakova to make Mullins work for those takedowns, but you still felt like Mullins left enough on the table that she could have been shooting a little bit more and still had more success. But she decided to strike with Zelezniakova, which is where she obviously had a disadvantage, and we saw her get touched up for her trouble and lose that fight on the scorecards. Now, I'm not willing to completely write her off, right? She's 34 years old. She's definitely up there in age. But if she really gets to her grappling game, she can be one of the better fighters in the women's bantamweight division. But can you trust her after a performance like that? That's where things really start to get shaky, and that's where I question whether she actually deserves to get the job, to be a favorite in fights. In this one particularly, she finds herself at a pick 'em price, but more so, can we trust her to go out there and actually wrestle, considering she didn't do so last time? Now, she's going up against Luana Carolina, who fumbled the bag as, she was an underdog, but she was coming up to 135 pounds in September when she went up against Michelle Montague. That was on the back end of having a fight canceled because she had weight cutting issues getting down to 125 pounds. That's not the first time. It's been several occasions where Carolina has struggled on the scales, causing fights to get canceled or pulling out or even just missing out flat and just going on with the fight at a catch weight. But now the UFC is like, hey, let's cut this out. Let's just go to 135 pounds and see if you can have any success there. She's normally a Muay Thai fighter, so she's often fighting opponents that are looking to take her to the ground. And at 125 pounds, she did a decent enough job in terms of stopping takedowns and forcing opponents to strike with her. But at 135 pounds, it might be a little bit harder for her because she's still building into that frame. She is long and lanky for the division, or at least for 125 pounds, so she fits right in at 135 as just a regular-sized bantamweight. But we saw the strength and size of Michelle Montague, a former 145er before coming to the UFC, really wear on Carolina, leading to Montague landing 5 of 7 takedown attempts and nearly accruing 11 minutes of control time. Carolina really struggled in that fight. She's clearly working on her wrestling, though, as you can see from some of her Instagram posts. She also earned her BJJ brown belt back in December, so she's clearly working on shoring up that side of her game, because if she can keep fights in the striking game, that's where she often finds success against her opponents with her output, volume, and just stinging strikes and combinations that she lands. Now, here against Melissa Mullins, pure striker versus grappler battle, right? That's why the line is roughly around a pick 'em. -115 for Carolina, -105 for Mullins. it's really what you like. Do you trust Mullins enough to go out there and grapple more than she did in her last fight? And even if she does, can she hold Carolina down and have as much dominance as we've seen her on her rise to the UFC? And then on the flip side for Carolina, do we trust in her defensive grappling improvements enough that she can go out there and outstrike Mullins and win this fight by pretty much just out damaging Mullins? I hate swinging so far on a pendulum against a fighter that I was so confident in with Mullins, but Carolina is a fighter that I've often underrated throughout her career. So I feel like this might be one of those spots where she could have a breakout performance where she stops the takedowns of Mullins or at least quickly works back to her feet. And then from there, I expect Carolina to apply her striking edge, and that should lead to her outstriking Mullins and winning this fight on the scorecards. Considering how close the odds here, I don't want a shot on Carolina either, considering how I expect this fight to play out. All right, moving over to the women's strawweight division now. We got Chanel Dyer coming in at minus 450 going up against Ravina Oliveira, who comes in at plus 350. Now, starting off on the Dyer side of things, even though she didn't get her hand raised on the Contender Series this past season, Dana was still impressed with the performance of both women between Carol Foho and her, that Dana still decided to sign both of them. You know, Dyer, Muay Thai specialist, very nasty combination, good head kicks, good knees and elbows, but I don't think she was expecting the amount of power that her opponent Foro was carrying in that matchup. Within the opening 2 minutes, we saw Foro drop Dyer and wobble her repeatedly, even opening up a nasty cut over the left eye of Dyer. Dyer somehow stayed in that matchup after repeatedly getting dropped and hurt, and even won the scorecard, or at least won the third round on 2 judges' scorecards, showing her heart, grit, and determination. She's usually not that far behind it in terms of the striking game. She's usually the one that's better in the striking realm and is able to go out there and put good combinations on her opponents, or even find that knockout with her head kicks that are so dangerous. She's part of the GBTT, Great Britain top team, which is head coached by Mr. Brad Pickett. Obviously a very solid head coach to really bring these fighters along. We've obviously seen him do a great job with fighters like Nathaniel Wood and even Loney Kavanaugh. And Chanel Dyer is his next project in terms of somebody to work on to get to the next level and succeed at that next level. Like I said, very good Muay Thai. Her grappling is improving as well. She took a grappling bout in between her pro MMA career and actually pulled off an omoplata. So it's clear that she's working on that aspect of her game to really round out and not just be strictly a striker. Now she's going up against a striker in Ravina Oliveira, who is now 0-2 in the UFC. Oliveira has really struggled to be successful at this level. Now, her first fight was actually back in 2024, I believe it was, maybe 2023. I believe it was 2023, end of 2023, where she ended up getting out-grappled by Tainara Lisboa, who is primarily a striker, and that kind of goes to show the flaws in Oliveira's game. Oliveira managed to have some success in the third round of that matchup, but it was too little too late there, and it seemed more so that Lisboa was content fighting off of her back, knowing that she wasn't going to get finished. Then Oliveira sat out for about 2 years, and actually that fight was October of 2023. Then she returns in October of 2025, coming back from her knee surgery, recovery, rehab, all that stuff. And she still looked like not that good of a fighter against Stephanie Luciano, who arguably is a tougher opponent than Tainara Lisboa. We saw them be somewhat competitive through the first couple minutes of that fight, but then Luciano really started to pull away near the ending of the first round. In the second round, at the ending of the second round, we saw Luciano get the fight to the ground with relative ease. So she's like, hey, let's do this again in round 3. She got to the grappling right away, got Oliveira down repeatedly without much resistance, and then eventually worked to the back and got the submission win over Oliveira. Oliveira has a lot of holes in her game, especially in the ground game. And the striking is probably where she's strongest, but even there, she's very mediocre. Something to take into consideration is that she faced some very low-level competition before she got her opportunity with the UFC. Besides the last opponent that she beat before coming to the UFC, who was an 8-5 opponent who was 40 years old at the time, her other opponents combined for a record of 1-3. 5 of those 8 opponents were making their pro debuts, with only one of them with a win, who was 1-1 going into that fight. So it's easy to see why she was able to go out there and defeat that level of opponent. But as we've seen, and We'll talk about a few other fighters later on this card who fight very low-level competition on the regional scene and then get a rude awakening when they get to the UFC because the level is just that much higher. So like I said, Oliveira is best when she can get to her Muay Thai, but even then she's not anything special in that realm. Now here against Chanel Dyer, I get why Dyer is such a massive favorite here. She should be the better striker. Oliveira does not provide as much power threat as Carol Foro did. And even if Dyer wanted to take this fight to the ground, I think she can have major success there. And it wouldn't even surprise me if she ended up pulling off a submission. I saw the submission prop for Chanel is sitting at plus 1,000, maybe worth a little bit of a sprinkle there. But I think Dyer wins this fight any which way. Usually I'm a little bit skeptical about women's MMA, especially at chalk. But I feel like this is one that's meant for Dyer to show out in front of a hometown crowd and end up getting the win here. So give me Dyer. I'm going to say Dyer inside the distance. I think she just runs through Oliveira. But again, that submission prop at plus 1,000 is definitely something to consider considering how poor Oliveira's ground game is. All right, next up in the lightweight division, we got Shamrock coming in at plus 105 going up against Abdul Karim Al-Selwady, who comes in at minus 125. Now, starting off on the Shamrock side of things, he was a very hyped prospect coming over from Octagon MMA, a promotion that was pushing him very, very hard, almost making him look like he was their biggest star at the time, but he decided to jet. He wanted to get to the UFC. That's obviously every fighter's dream, to fight for the UFC, and Shamrock got his wish. Unfortunately, the UFC did him no favors by matching him up with a guy like Nurullo Aliev back in November for his debut. Shem had little to no success in that fight. You know, when you see the stats afterwards and you tell me that Aliev only landed one of his 5 takedown attempts, two things. I would question why Aliev didn't shoot more takedowns. And secondly, I would assume that Shem probably won because he stopped the takedowns and probably could have showcased a little bit more diverse striking game, or he was able to hop on the back of Aliev and get some control time there. But no. Aliev showed some improved hands. His striking looked really good that night, and he was wobbling Rock throughout that entire 15 minutes, and Rock had absolutely no success. He tried getting to his kicking game from distance, couldn't get anything off there. He tried initiating the clinch so he can get this into the grappling realm where he is often most successful, couldn't get that going either. So it was just a horrible stylistic matchup for Rock, hence why he was a plus 230 underdog in that matchup. But he is a guy that's skilled. You know, he has a very nasty jiu-jitsu game when he can actually get to it. Usually he does a great job in terms of getting the back of his opponents and either controlling it or sinking in chokes. And obviously training alongside guys like Paddy Pimblett and the rest of the killers that next-gen Liverpool brings usually gives a lot of confidence to these types of guys. So I'm not willing to write Shamrock off just yet, just because of that performance he had against Aliev. Aliev is a stylistic nightmare for almost any fighter in that division, especially consider how improved his striking game has looked as of late. And then, you know, his grappling game is obviously very high level as well. Now, Rock is going up against Abdul Karim Al-Selwady, who's really struggled in terms of getting inside the cage and having any type of consistency. He pulled off a big upset victory back in 2023 on the Contender Series, where he was able to get a win against George Hardwick. Like I said, big underdog that night, but we saw a very mobile striking game from Al-Selwady to touch up Hardwick and land big shots. Normally, Al-Selwady leans on his grappling game to take opponents down and rely on his BJJ black belt to keep opponents in bad positions or find finishing opportunities from there. But we saw him try to lean on the striking a little bit more, even in his UFC debut back in March of 2024 when he went up against Loik Radzhabov. Now, that fight, we saw Al-Selwady do a decent job of utilizing that style in the first round, but he really struggled in terms of getting off effective damage because of the power and the strength of Loik Radzhabov specifically in that first round. Al-Selwady found some decent success in the second round by landing a takedown, especially in the last minute of that round and grinding that round out. But then unfortunately, he ended up eating a big right hook in the first minute of the last round and ended up getting knocked out. Now, he's been out of action ever since then, right? This guy has had a lot of issues. He was suspected to return in August of 2024, but was forced out due to a spine injury. Not a good look whatsoever. He was then expected to return in February of 2025, but both of his opponents ended up pulling out. He had 2 scheduled opponents for that card. Both of them ended up pulling out at different moments. And then he was scheduled to fight in October, but then an undisclosed injury during fight week pulled him out of that matchup. So normally he's a guy with a grindy BJJ style and an improving striking game, but you have to wonder what that layoff is going to do for him, especially after coming off of a spine injury. That's just not a good look. Now here, this is a matchup between 2 guys that are trying to get back onto the winning track. You got Rock, who's going to be looking to try to keep Al-Selwady at bay, or even try to mix into the grappling realm and try to get some good control off, whereas Al-Selwady will try to stick and move as best as he can. He has a 3-inch height and 4-inch reach disadvantage he's going to try to overcome in this matchup, and I think that's going to be somewhere that he struggles against Shamrock. I think when there is a car crash and a pocket exchange, I think we'll see Rock actually find a way to get to controlling positions against Al-Selwady, and I also think Rock has a better gas tank should this fight get into deeper water. So considering the odds and considering the stylistic matchup, I think this is a pretty good spot for Rock to actually pull off his first UFC win. I expect him to land more damage from distance. I expect him to keep Al-Selwady at bay, and then when the opportunity presents itself, he can get this into the grappling realm and either I'd be surprised if he submits Al-Selwady, but I think he can get some good enough control time here to really muzzle the Palestinian fighter. So give me Shamrock by decision. All right, moving over to the heavyweights now. We got Sutherland coming in at plus 230, going up against Brando Pericic, who comes in at minus 270. Now, Sutherland got a rude awakening to the UFC when he went up against Walter Walker and got heel hooked in just less than a minute and a half. Now, that was actually his second scheduled UFC matchup. The first one was against Justin Tafa a month earlier, but Tafa dubiously misses the heavyweight limit, subsequently gets cut from the UFC as well. And luckily for Sutherland, Walter Walker's opponent, that same card, pulled out, so the UFC decided to match these two up just a month later. It was a bad stylistic matchup for Sutherland. Sutherland, very mediocre heavyweight. The 4-fight winning streak that he had before coming into the UFC, not against the greatest level of competition under the Levels Fight League promotion. He won the heavyweight title in his last showing with that promotion, but he's not a guy that really jumps off the page in any one particular discipline. I will say, for his size, he moves quite well. You would expect this guy to be a little bit slow and sluggish at times, but he doesn't move all too bad for a guy of his size. Mediocre punching power, can get to the grappling if he needs to against a certain level of competition, but I think there's a hard cap on how far Sutherland can actually get inside the UFC. Again, I'm not all that big on him, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of those guys that within 3 or 4 fights of being in the UFC, that he finds himself out of the UFC. Now, he's going up against Brando Pericic, who had a successful UFC debut when he was able to knock out Alicia Ellison. I believe that was at the end of September. That was a fight that was actually scheduled to take place on the Contender series, but considering how thin the heavyweight division is, the UFC just decided to bring both those guys into the fold, and we saw still, some of the rawness to their game. Ellison was trying to get Pericic to the ground for the life of him. Pericic did a good job in terms of stuffing a few of those takedowns. Then there was a moment where Ellison seemed like he pulled guard, and he was trying to disrupt the balance of Pericic and try to find a reversal or even a submission opportunity. Before he could even get on anything close enough to that, he got his lights put out completely, considering the nasty punching power that Pericic was able to land with. Pericic comes from a kickboxing background. He has big power in his hands, but he is a guy similar to Ravina Oliveira, who I don't think has the toughest strength of schedule on his way to the UFC, and I think that's going to work against him as he starts facing tougher competition. His last 2 wins before coming to the UFC were against guys that were coming in to their pro debut. Not a good look. His one loss came against a guy that was successfully able to out-grapple him, wear him down for 1 round, and then eventually find a submission in the second round, and that's often where you see the hole in Pericic's game. As a striker, nasty power, good timing, good counters, and it looks like he's improving his takedown defense game, hence why he was able to, keep that fight upright against Alicia Ellison. But I really think Ellison was at a big strength disadvantage that night, and he really struggled to get off on any success there. And then Pericic showcased his knockout power and got him out of there. Now here against Louis Sutherland, I think Sutherland might take a little bit more of a conservative approach compared to what Alicia Ellison was trying to do against Pericic. I think Sutherland won't mind try to land some ticky-tacky shots from outside, some leg kicks, try to soften Pericic up a little bit, and then mask that takedown attempt a little bit better behind it. And it would not at all surprise me if he's actually successful with it. Pericic could obviously clip him at any moment and put his lights out. That is absolutely true. But if Sutherland can lean on his experience, lean on his well-roundedness, he might be able to find some positions to have some success against Pericic. With that said, still a very low-level fight all in all. Still tough to have much confidence on either side. I find myself still siding with Pericic, as I think his power will end up landing here. Anytime Sutherland tries to go in for a takedown, I see Pericic kind of just defending long enough to land big shots to scare Sutherland away from another takedown attempt or from continuing that specific takedown attempt. And then from there, I think Pericic can kind of dictate the pace with his power. But again, very low-level fight on either side. I can't trust Pericic at this type of chalk, nor do I feel compelled enough to take a flyer here on Sutherland as the big dog either. So we'll go Pericic and Pericic by knockout. But again, sit back and watch this one, see what they bring to the table, and see if we can use anything to bet on or against these guys moving forward. All right, next up, middleweights going at it now, where we got Mantas Kondratavicius coming in at -700 going up against Antonio Trocoli, who comes in at +525. Now, starting off on the Kondratavicius side, I'm going to go with Mantas. We're not going to keep saying that long-ass last name that these Lithuanians normally bring to the table. But Mantas is a guy I originally came across when I was studying him up for his Cage Warriors matchup, which was his last one before getting on to the Contender Series. And he showcased a very slick striking game. None of his fights hitting the scorecards. He had only reached the second round twice. One of those, I believe he got finished in, and the other one he was able to get the win. But he usually brings a karate-type striking game where he blitzes the pocket very well with straight shots down the pipe. Then he cuts angles and gets back out into distance. But he's a very aggressive and very active fighter. His lone loss came against Aries FC champion Virgil Augen, who's actually a training partner of Axel Sola, who I'll be talking about later on this card. But Augen used a grapple-heavy approach, was able to slow Kondratavicius down, and then eventually find that second-round submission. And then when Mantas fought on Cage Warriors, he went up against Michael Chamu, who, if you know, right? Chamu is one of the more entertaining fighters on Cage Warriors. That guy may never make it to the UFC or even get a shot on the Contender Series because of how volatile his game is. He's very good in terms of creating chaos and thriving within it, but also going out on his shield if he's fighting somebody good enough. And that's what he fought with Mantas that night. Mantas stuffed the takedown of Chamu immediately. They engaged in a pocket exchange, and it was a slicker, straighter shots of Mantas that eventually clipped Chamu and put him away. And that all took place in just 47 seconds. Then Kondratavicius gets that Contender Series shots against Daniil Barbier. And I was kind of surprised to see Mantas be the one shooting right away. I thought he would engage in the pocket immediately with Barbier and try to rely on his speed and technical superiority. But after Barbier stuffed that takedown attempt and they were forced to exchange once again, Kondratavicius showed why he was going to get his hand raised that night by landing that straight shot down the pipe and putting Barbier's lights straight out. At 26 years old, this guy is a fun prospect in the middleweight division, especially considering how much violence and entertainment he brings whenever he steps foot inside the cage. Now, he's going up against Antonio Trocoli, who is winless in the UFC. This guy has not won a fight since, I believe, November of 2021. It's 5.5 years since he's gotten a win. He had a 3-year-long layoff before coming to the UFC, which I still don't understand why the UFC decided to sign him, but he got knocked out by Sharon Magomedov in 2.5 rounds. Again, kind of surprised that he even made it that far, especially when you consider that Trishan Gore and Mansour Abdul Malik both submitted him in less than a round and a half, or less than a minute and a half. I don't know what Trocoli does great. He's very hittable. He looks for the door whenever he can. He's fought very low-level competition on the regional scene as well. I don't want to spend too much time on this guy. I just don't think he's UFC level whatsoever. I'm expecting Montas to pretty much run through him here. I think if he puts the pressure on Trocoli immediately, Trocoli will break and eventually fold. And I don't mind the early round props here on Kondratavicius. You got round one submission sitting at plus 1,000, which I know Montas normally looks for KOs, but if he looks to go for the takedown right away like he did against Daniel and open up a submission opportunity, I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to succeed with that. But still, round one sitting at plus 115 on a minus 700 favorite, I don't think that's a bad spot either. So I'm going to go with the Lithuanian here to make short work of Antonio Trocoli. Yeah, I'd rather take the round one prop than his money line though. All right, moving over to the heavyweight division now. We got Mario Pinto coming in at minus 900 going up against UFC newcomer Felipe Franco, who comes in at plus 600. Now, Pinto, 11-0, undefeated. Somehow we were able to get solid plus money on him last time around against Jonathan Dinez because people didn't expect Pinto to grapple. I know he mostly showed that he was a striker throughout his career, but you got to believe when you see an opponent with such a big flaw in their grappling game the way that Dinez did, Pinto and his team were going to game plan for him to go for takedowns. And that's exactly what he did. One judge actually gave him a 10-8 in round one because of how much he was dominating Dinez on the ground. But scorecards did not end up mattering as Pinto was able to get the TKO at the ending of the second round, completely dominating Dinez that night. Now, I know Pinto's first impression, especially in the UFC, did not look the greatest because he got dropped by Lane and nearly finished. But you got to give him credit for being able to survive that, coming back in the second round and producing his own knockout win. This guy is usually a very educated striker with good combinations, good timing, and good discipline. He doesn't usually rush anything. He kind of just waits for his opportunities and finds the shots to pick his opponents apart or look for takedown opportunities where he can have success there as well. He actually trains under the last fighter to have a legitimate win over Tom Aspinall in Stuart Austin. Stuart Austin was able to heel hook Tom Aspinall years and years ago, and that's actually the head coach of Mario Pinto, which is not a bad, guidance or a mentor to have, a guy that's as well-rounded as Stuart Austin is. Obviously, Stuart didn't make it to the highest level in mixed martial arts, but he's still a skilled and well-rounded mixed martial artist and clearly doing wonders for Mario Pinto's career. Now, moving over to the Felipe Franco side of things, I'm very surprised the UFC has decided to give this guy a shot. He got his opportunity on Contender Series this past season where he went up against Freddy Vidal, who came in on short notice and missed weight, but Felipe Franco looked absolute dog shit in that fight. We saw Franco get taken down in the first round of that fight, something that you did not expect to happen in the moment, and Vidal pretty much wore Franco down. The body language for Franco in that second round, even though he had a little bit of success, was not good. It seemed he gassed out in one round, which is absolutely horrible. Then in the third round, Vidal was able to push a little bit more and eventually get a rear naked choke against the BJJ black belt, forcing the tap with about 12 seconds left to go in that fight. Franco, up until that point, looked like the goods. He had me sold, right? He had me thinking that this guy was going to be somebody with big, big potential. But the level of competition he faced on the regional scene, similar to what we talked about with Ravina Oliveira, very low level. 8 of his wins on the regional scene, with only one of them was against a fighter with a win on their record. Hear me out. Only one of his 8 opponents on the regional scene had a win on their record. I got fooled, guys. I'm sorry. I apologize. So after the Vidal loss, he goes back to the regional scene. He beats a 10-7 opponent who was 41 years old at the time. He immediately knocked him down, followed up with ground and pound, and got the finish. Then in February, he went up against a 1-1 super low-level Muay Thai fighter, and that was one which you expect. He got to his grappling immediately, got the fight to the ground, and eventually opened up that submission, which was kind of funny, right? You see the submission he attempts an arm triangle choke, which he is struggling to finish, and then his opponent kind of rolled away from it, so Franco was able to get his back, but Franco did not let go of the arm triangle position, and as soon as the opponent turned, he tapped. So it wasn't like a legitimate rear naked choke. It was almost like an arm triangle from the back position, which usually doesn't submit anybody, right? Especially if they know what they're doing. And Franco was able to get the tap. So again, still facing very low level competition. And this guy's a light heavyweight, right? So he's taking this fight on short notice, up a weight class just to get into the UFC. But you have to wonder if he's still UFC ready and worthy of this spot. At his best, he utilizes his BJJ black belt, his judo brown belt, gets opponents to the ground immediately and smashes them. But that's going to get harder to do as he faces guys that will actually provide resistance. And that's what he's facing this weekend against Mario Pinto, hence why Pinto finds himself as a minus 900 favorite. Now, I expect Pinto to keep this fight upright. I expect Pinto to be the better striker, and I expect Pinto to eventually land a big shot to put Franco away. I'm interested to see what the actual props. I didn't get a chance to look at the props for this specific matchup, but I think Pinto eventually gets him out of there. I just don't know when. I'm a little bit hesitant in terms of the under 1.5 in case Franco is a little bit successful with kind of eating clock up by shooting for takedowns and initiating in the clinch. He is strong, even though he's a light heavyweight, but I think Pinto should be able to shut most of that down and then outstrike him on the feet, leading to a knockout victory. But I'm assuming with a minus 900 favorite, the KO prop is going to probably be somewhere around minus 150, minus 200, which I don't like paying that type of chalk for specific props like knockout props. But I'm still picking Pinto to win. I don't think Franco has much of a chance at all, and I'm going to go Pinto by knockout. Our next up, very fun featherweight clash here as we have Nathaniel Wood coming in at plus 185 going up against Keita, who comes in at minus 220. Now, starting off on the Wood side of things are looking good for him ever since moving up to featherweight. He is 6-1 at the division now, with his one loss being to Muhammad Naimov in a very close fight and somewhat controversial considering the fouls that Naimov continued to commit throughout that matchup. But since then, Wood is now 3-0, defeating Daniel Pineda, Morgan Charrier, showcasing a very well-rounded skill set that night, and then coming back and winning a decision against Jose Delgado, who just picked up a split decision win over Andre Fili this past weekend. But against Delgado, we saw Wood get dropped and nearly finished in the first round, but luckily his veterancy came through for him in the second and third rounds, and he was able to outwork Delgado and just barely win that fight. It was a close fight. Probably could have gone either way, but I was happy because I took an underdog shot on Wood and it ended up paying off for us that night. But again, it goes to show his experience, his fight IQ. 28 fights into his career. He was seen as a guy that would probably contend for the bantamweight title one time, but it seemed like the weight cut really started to get to him. Obviously, the knockout loss to John Dodson and then getting out grappled by Casey Kenny kind of halted his momentum at that division. But since moving to 145 pounds, it seems like he has kind of resurrected his career in a sense. And still a guy that could go out there and get some big wins and maybe find himself in that top 10 to 15 range if he's able to mount up a few more wins here. Now he's going up against Keita, who is one of the most highly touted prospects coming out of Octagon MMA. He was a double champ over there, if I'm not mistaken. He won titles at 145 and 155, and then he got signed to the UFC and was scheduled to take on Patricio Pitbull back in September. Unfortunately, he mismanaged his weight cut down to 145 pounds. He weighed in at 149. Patricio did not want to take the fight, hence the fight ended up getting canceled. But Keita, I think there was a lot working against him going into that fight. He got signed pretty late, and then he was forced to go down to 145 pounds. And knowing the gamer that he is, obviously he was going to take that opportunity and jump all over it. Little did he know that he would struggle to make the weight that he did. Normally he makes 145 without much issue, but I think the abbreviated training camp, having to cut down to 145 pounds, all that kind of just had a recipe for disaster, hence why he ended up missing the weight. There was also rumors that he was going to end up getting cut because I'm sure he's getting a much better paycheck than anybody else who just gets signed straight to the UFC, considering the body of work he had already put together over there in Octagon MMA. I love his style, though. This guy is an explosive, fast power puncher who looks to knock his opponents out as quickly as he can, but he has the gas tank to go 25 minutes if he needs to. He's also usually fighting guys that look to take him to the ground, but his takedown defense is very high level. He does a great job in getting right back to his feet if he is taken down, and then he just commands the pace by walking his opponents down and landing big strikes. Now, the one loss on his record was due to an injury that he suffered in a fight against, I believe, Nico Samsonidze. I think he broke his foot in the opening round of that fight, and the fight was called off due to injury. But this guy's been going out there and absolutely starching dudes left and right. He's very, very skilled, very, very hyped, and I think he's going to continue to reach that hype and blast through it, especially with the way the UFC is matching him up this weekend against Nathaniel Wood. And also that foot injury, I just wanted to quickly check it here. It was against Mate Sanikidze. Sorry. He ended up knocking out Nico Samsonidze when he returned. What was it? he only took 5 months off after that foot injury and managed to get back onto the winning track there. But even the way the UFC initially matched him up, right, against Patricio Pitbull, it's clear they thought the world of this guy, but he obviously let them down a little bit with the weight kerfuffle there. So hopefully he has that under wraps this time around, because if he can go out there and make the weight, this guy is going to be an absolute problem at 145 pounds. Now, again, tough matchup here against Nathaniel Wood right off the bat. He's fighting a well-rounded guy with a ton of experience and a guy that could maybe find safety at range. However, I think Keita will be able to close that distance. I think Wood will be surprised at the speed of Keita, and then before he knows it, he's going to be staring up at the lights. I think we'll see Keita repeatedly land big shots here, and I think he eventually puts Wood's lights out clean. I don't think Wood has a big enough grappling edge here to take Keita to the ground to try to find some room for safety. I think he'll struggle big time there, and then just continue to get bombed on by Keita. So I'm going to take Keita and Keita by knockout, and I feel pretty damn good about him, especially at minus 220. All right, moving over to a lightweight fixture that we have here between Mason Jones, who comes in at minus 120, going up against the undefeated Axel Sola, who comes in at plus 100. Now, Mason Jones made a triumphant return to the UFC scene with a very fun fight against Jeremy Stephens. Now, that was a fight where he chose to oblige with Jeremy Stephens and provide a banger of a matchup for 2 rounds in front of the Iowa crowd. But then Jones is like, you know what? Let me ensure that I secured this win and get to my grappling in the 3rd round. And that round, he grinded Stephens out and clearly won that fight 30-27 on the scorecards. Then he went up against Balaji Oki, a fight that provided a lot of scary moments for him. He got hurt very badly in the opening minute of that fight, repeatedly dropped, but somehow managed to survive, get to the 2nd round, and then he eventually found his groove with top position, landing big shots, and eventually getting Balaji Oki out of there by TKO. Now, Jones initially went 1-2 in the UFC and then eventually decided to go back to the regional scene, going back to the Cage Warrior scene so he can work on his skill set a little bit more without the losses really meaning as much as they would in the UFC. And he was able to win 4 straight fights. He finished 3 of those opponents. His last win over the previously undefeated Michael Pagani, who's obviously a very high-level Cage Warriors fighter. And Jones ended up getting the call back to the UFC, and he is in fine form. We obviously know about his violent striking game where he loves to engage in the pocket and rely on his durability to not get knocked out and force his opponent into deep water. And then he also has a very reliable grappling game where he can take opponents to the ground, threaten with submissions, but also land some nasty ground and pound, just as we saw when he went up against Balaji Oki. What gives me some issues at times with Jones is his lack of athleticism, which and lack of speed at times, which can make him be hit, just as we saw in the Balaji Oki fight, and then cause him issues against guys that are athletically more gifted or can keep him away from his grappling game. Now, he's going up against Axel Sola, coming in with an 11-0-1 record. He got a bit of a short notice call to the UFC to make his debut back in September on the UFC Paris card, fighting in front of his home country, and he was able to chip away at Rhys McKee and eventually find a nasty 3rd round finish. I will say this, though. I think McKee was not given as much rope as he should have been by Herb Dean that night. We saw Sola drop McKee with the body shot, and then Sola just did his job by landing some ground and pound. But it seemed to me that McKee looked okay, and he was trying to grab the grips or at least get some wrist control on Sola. And while he was doing so is when Herb Dean stepped in. So I kind of wish that Herb gave McKee a little bit more rope there. But regardless, Sola went out there and did exactly what he needed to do. Sola is a former Aries FC champion for the lightweight division. Won the title, defended it a few times as well, faced some pretty good competition the entire way to really deserve this opportunity in the UFC, and you obviously saw him make good on it against Rhys McKee. Now, I'll say that Rhys McKee fight, his body language did not look the greatest, especially in the 2nd and 3rd rounds, but he still got the job done. He still did what he needed to do, and he still got all the judges to score those first 2 rounds in his favor. At his best, he normally picks opponents apart from distance, utilizes a consistent jab, sticks and moves very well, and then he sprinkles in the grappling game whenever he needs it to try to control his opponent, maybe catch his breath if he needs to, but also dominate opponents on the ground if he needs to as well. But he's very well-rounded. He has a great physique for 155 pounds, standing at 6'2" with a 74-inch reach, and he maximizes all that with his striking approach, kind of keeping opponents at bay and picking them apart. Now here against Mason Jones, I studied this fight earlier today, and the line was minus 130 for Jones. Now he's down to minus 120. So it looks like there is some Sola love coming in. And as I was breaking down this fight, I was kind of struggling to really pick a side here with confidence. But the more I thought about it, the more I feel like this is a fight where Sola can expose some of those flaws in Jones's game regarding the lack of athleticism, lack of speed at times. I think Sola can do a good enough job in terms of keeping this fight upright, because I think once Jones realized that he's probably going to get outstruck, once his nose starts bleeding, once the cuts on his face start opening up, obviously the optics won't look that great for him. And the way for him to change the tide there is to look to get this fight to the ground. But I think Sola is strong enough, and I think he has a good enough grappling game to kind of keep Jones away from actually having success getting this fight to the ground. From there, I just think the pressure, not even the pressure, but the consistent jab, the output, the volume, the counter-striking of Sola should help him pick apart Jones and win this fight on the scorecards. Again, it was very hard for me to get to this side because I'm a big Mason Jones fan, and I think he, even though his odds in fights are often close, I think he's still live to still go out there and get wins. But this is one, stylistically speaking, where I just think Sola is a little bit cleaner in all aspects of the game, and that should be enough to get him over the line here. So I'm going to go Sola and Sola by decision. All right. Let's move over. I believe this is going to be the first fight of the main card, and it takes place in the featherweight division as we have UFC newcomer Curtis Campbell coming in at minus 200, going up against Danny Silva, who comes in at plus 170. Now, Campbell, the Pink Panther, I believe his nickname is. This guy is a hoot to watch. I love watching this guy throw down. I love watching him fight. Obviously, I studied up on him when he got the opportunity on the Contender series, and he ran through his opponent. I forgot the guy's name. D-Sec. I forgot what his first name was. Damien Sec. Whatever it is. When you saw the stare down. Now I hadn't heard of Curtis Campbell before I studied him up for that Contender Series fight. And I actually saw the face-offs first before I started doing the research. And I'm like, oh, of course, Sec is going to be the favorite here, right? Like, there's a complete advantage for Sec in terms of the physicality and their physiques. But when you run the tape, you see why Curtis Campbell was such a big favorite that night, because of how relentless and nasty this guy is. He doesn't train with a big camp or anything out there in the UK, but he's made it work. I think he only had one loss as an amateur, but he's now 8-0 as a pro. He has a few titles to his name on the regional scene as well. He's finished 6 of his 8 pro wins, but has the cardio to go into deep water and still be effective if he needs to. But this guy is a honey badger in a sense, right? This guy's just so aggressive, gets his opponents to the ground almost immediately, works to dominant positions and neither gets submissions or TKOs. His striking is obviously not that bad either, because he does a good job in terms of staying safe defensively and then finding those openings to shoot takedowns or engage in the clinch. And then he's very deceiving with how strong he is as well, especially when he gets that body lock position. He does a great job in terms of getting his opponents down. And even if his opponents work back to their feet, he does not get broken, in terms of his confidence. He just gets back to it and gets back to his game. There is very little tape, if any, on Campbell in bad positions or settling for bad positions. The only one that really came to mind was when he went up against, I think it was Matthias Lima. Matthias Lima, when he won the FCC title, he got a dominant back position, but eventually got shook off as he was going for a finish. And he only spent about 5 to 10 seconds on his back before he eventually scrambled and got the dominant position right back. So I love that about fighters. I love fighters that do not settle for bad positions. And Curtis Campbell is one of those guys. Even in the striking game, right? He always keeps the pressure. He throws a lot of feints. He shows a lot of level changes, and he gets to his style. This kid has a big, big future in the UFC. I think this is one of those kids that, the type of career that Paddy Pimblett will hope to have had once it's all said and done. Obviously, Paddy up there in age now compared to Campbell, or at least older than Campbell. But Campbell, 23 years old, the world is his oyster essentially, right? If he continues to fight at this skill level, this kid's going to be a champion one day for sure. Now, he's going up against a tough first challenge here in the UFC. Danny Silva, coming off of a decision loss to Kevin Vallejos back in August, I believe it was. Only one judge gave one round to Silva in that fight against Vallejos. Outside of that, Vallejos outstruck and out damage Silva. He was just landing bigger shots, landing the more eye-catching shots, and that's kind of been the issue in Silva's game in the past. Like, he's a very technical boxer, very slick hands, very good kickboxing as well, but he doesn't land with a whole lot of emphasis, and that leaves a lot of room for judges to score it for the other guy, especially if the other guy is landing just as much damage in return or as much output in return, but mixing in the takedowns or mixing in power punches, that could definitely get them the edge over a guy like Danny Silva. But Silva, solid fighter, obviously made some good improvements since that first loss that he had against Kanan Kawai, I believe was the guy that he lost to on the LFA scene. Obviously training alongside guys like Cub Swanson, Dan Argueta, Rafa Garcia, Lorraine Douglas, and a few other prospects from the LFA scene. Silva's a solid prospect in his own right, 29 years old, but I think he's mainly a striker. His grappling defense is not all that bad, which is why he's often fighting guys in the striking game more than anything. But I think if he fights a strong enough wrestler and grappler, that's where we'll see that side of his game kind of get exposed. And I think that's exactly what he's fighting this weekend in Curtis Campbell. I don't think Silva has the knockout power to test the ironclad chin of Campbell. I think Campbell can be competitive enough in the striking to eventually get this to a point where he can mix in the clinch or the grappling game and get this fight to the ground. And then from there, I really think he can cause Silva big damage. And I think he even leads to a potential Campbell finish here. So, this is one of those spots. I've talked about it all year. You have a Contender Series dominant performer coming into the UFC as somewhat of a chalky favorite, roughly around that minus 200 range, going up against a veteran in the UFC, although Silva's only had about 3 fights in the UFC, and that guy finds himself as a plus 170, plus 150 underdog. And I often like to lean on the guys that are the UFC veterans, right? Like we did with Rodolfo Bellito against Luke Fernandez a few weeks ago. Sometimes, or I'd say more often than not, that probably pans out better. I'd like to see the statistics on that, but I feel like, backing the UFC veteran at around that plus 150, plus 200 range is probably profitable. But in this matchup specifically, I don't think so. Stylistically speaking, I don't think it's a great one for Danny Silva. I think we'll see Campbell get to his game, and I think we see him eventually find that finish, either TKO or submission, but I really like Curtis Campbell in this fight. All right, moving over to the middleweight division now. We got Roman Dolidze coming in at plus 350, going up against Christian Leroy Duncan, who comes in at minus 450. Now, Dolidze is coming off of a absolute beatdown courtesy of Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who kept Dolidze on the back foot, kept taking him down, mat returning, threatening with submissions, and then eventually in the 4th round got that nasty rear naked choke. It was like I think Dolidze was on his knees and Anthony Smith was kind of just on his back standing and just slapped on that choke and squeezed as hard as he could, and Dolidze was forced to tap. And that just kind of shows, like, Dolidze is normally the more aggressive, a gritty fighter in the cage. But when he's fighting a guy that's grittier than him, that can handle his aggression, that's where he ends up coming up short. He had a 4-fight winning streak, which was he was trying to match his 4-fight winning streak as he went into that fight with Anthony Hernandez. But again, very, very tough stylistic matchup for him. He's one of those guys that relies on his just toughness and warrior mentality to make up for some of his technical shortcomings. I think he is an accredited BJJ brown belt, maybe black belt, but you don't really see that fully on display. He can beat the Anthony Smiths and he can force Kevin Holland to quit and even outdamage Marvin Vettori, who, really struggles to get off on big damage in his fights. But he will come up short against the Nasruddin Imavovs and Anthony Hernandez's because of his inability to land legitimate technical shots and only relying on that pace and pressure that he brings to the table. I don't think he's that great. He's kind of been the joke of the MMA betting community when he first came into the game. And I think even, myself, a lot of other people are surprised that he's managed to get to a point where he was headlining a few fight night cards and even fighting some of the top guys in the middleweight division. But we're seeing over the last couple of fights, he will come up short against the guys that actually deserve to be fighting for titles. Now he's going up against Christian Leroy Duncan, who had an absolutely spectacular performance against Marco Tulio last time around. I was surprised that we were able to get Tulio, as the underdog that night. I think a lot of people were buying into the hype of Tulio, but I think that's the benefit of like watching Cage Warriors, watching LFA, breaking these guys down even on the regional scene. So once they make it to the UFC, maybe some people will make them out to be better than they actually are. But like, Tulio only had wins over Trishan Gore and Ihor Potieria, and he found himself as a big favorite or a somewhat of a favorite against Christian Leroy Duncan. I just knew something was off at that point. Duncan obviously fell short in a few of his UFC fights as well, specifically that Gregory Rodriguez fight, but at his best, he's nasty. He's getting more comfortable in the clinch game, which helps him slow his opponents down, and then from there he can, spring flashy big techniques on his opponents and get them out of there, like he did against Eric Anders and like he did against Marco Tulio, and he's very much rounded out his game from just being this headhunter. On the regional scene for Cage Warriors, he was always dealing with guys that would constantly look to take him to the ground, but his takedown defense was good enough that he was able to keep them out, and then his opponents kind of just gassed out, and he was able to land big shots and get them out of there that way. Now he's the one kind of applying pressure in the clinch, landing some dirty boxing, landing some knees, and then letting go with big strikes when his opponents start to slow down. So I love that about his game. I love that he's maturing as a fighter, because he is a guy, if he can just dial everything in correctly, who's to say he can't be in title contention? He has that style. He has the knockout ability. He has the takedown defense. It's all about locking in mentally for him to go out there and actually get these wins. Now, when I studied this matchup late last week, he was roughly around minus 300, I think it was, minus 315. Now he's all the way up at minus 450. So it kind of just goes to show, people are low on him going up against Marco Tulio. Now they're just all over him against Roman Dolidze. I will say this. I'd probably take Dolidze over Tulio. I think Tulio's good, but I think he's more flash than substance. And I think Dolidze's style would cause Tulio some issues, especially with how often Dolidze moves forward and tries to, just command the cage and dictate the pace of fights. I think Tulio would break under that. But in this matchup, I think Duncan, if he finds himself getting backed up by Dolidze, I think we'll see Duncan engage in the clinch, start to wear on Dolidze with his strength and his power. But I think Duncan will often be able to land big shots here, and I think he'll be able to find the knockout. With that said, I think this line is just a little bit too wide, because if there is any inkling of that potential mental break with Duncan, a guy like Dolidze can expose that, especially if Dolidze continues to move forward. If he eats some of Duncan's best shots and he's still there, Duncan could absolutely break mentally and start allowing Dolidze to dictate the pace of this fight. So I wouldn't really trust Duncan at minus 450. I think he wins this fight. I think he gets the knockout, but I'm going to rein in my confidence a little bit here, because Dolidze is known to pull off even wackier shit than potentially springing the upset here. So I'm going to go Duncan by knockout, but just be a little bit skeptical about what Dolidze could potentially do to Duncan here. All right, moving over to the next fight here in the light heavyweight division. We got Baraniewski coming in at minus 600, going up against Austin Lane, who comes in at plus 450. Now, starting off on the Baraniewski side of things, he had a very fun and quick Contender Series performance where he knocked out Muhammad Ali in 16 seconds. Nasty finish there. That was hilarious, because when the fight began, the commentators were absolutely glazing Ali, saying this guy's a crazy good fighter, really good BJJ black belt as well. And before they could finish glazing him, Baraniewski put his lights clean out. Baraniewski is an absolute monster when it comes to just putting his opponents away. As a pro, he's finished all 7 of his opponents in the first round with the straight up knockout, or eventually getting top position and getting the finish that way. He usually looks to get opponents to the ground as soon as he can, and then let go of big shots from there, or threaten with submissions as well. Against Ibo Aslan, that was a wild fight that lasted, 89 seconds or something like that. Both guys had some moments, but ultimately it was Baraniewski who was able to land the big shot to put Aslan away. But this guy's fun to watch. There's a reason they're giving him this spot in the UFC or on the main card on this UFC London card. He's fun, he's strong, he's powerful, and a guy that maybe doesn't contend for a title, but definitely could go out there and cause a lot of issues for guys looking to break into that top 10, top 5, just because of his power and explosivity alone. Now he's going up against Austin Lane, who at 38 years old is looking to go down to 205 pounds. Now, this guy is a big heavyweight, right? He was big, he's brooding, he's athletic, 6'6", 80-inch reach. I believe he was weighing in roughly around like the high 240s or mid 240s when he was a heavyweight, and now he's looking to cut down to 205 pounds to try to save his UFC career. He's 1-4 in his last 5 fights. I believe all 5 of those are his UFC fights. He had that no contest against Justin Tafa, and then eventually they rematched right after, and he got knocked out in that fight. His only win was against Robelis Despain, which, a fight very boring, but it was a game plan Lane needed to stay away from the knockout power of Despain. Took him to the ground, grinded him out, rinsed and repeated for 15 minutes, and got the win. Unfortunately, he really struggles after having good success in round ones, right? The Mario Pinto fight, let's start with the Dinas fight. Hurt Dinas very badly, got him to the ground, smothered him, nearly finished him, and then eventually got finished in the second round of that fight. The Mario Pinto fight, hurt Pinto very badly in the first round, had some good success there, and then gets finished in the opening seconds of round 2. And then against Vitor Petrino, just had little to no success at all anyway. He's a guy that relied heavily on his athletic background. I believe he was a former football player, maybe in the NFL. He's relied on that explosivity, that power, that speed, that strength as well. That's what got him to the UFC in the first place. But you can see those technical shortcomings are really hurting him at this stage of his career. And again, I don't like aging fighters dropping weight classes, especially when they already seem big enough for the weight class that they're currently in. So one, we have to keep an eye on the fact that whether he's going to make weight or not. That's one thing, right? Second, how is his durability going to look considering he's been knocked out in 3 of his 4 UFC losses and is pretty bad in terms of his durability to begin with. And now the UFC is putting him up against a guy like Iwo Baraniewski who has crazy knockout power. This is a recipe for disaster for Austin Lane. I think Baraniewski wins this pretty easily. I think if he wants, he could look to get this to the ground. I think Lane will be too sucked out and dry from his weight cut to provide too much of a resistance in terms of the strength that he normally carries. And I think that could lead to Baraniewski either landing a big shot and putting Lane out that way or taking him to the ground and then smashing him from that top position as well. So I think Baraniewski wins. Normally, I look to try to stay away from guys like Baraniewski, especially at chalk. But I think that this is a fight that he probably wins 8 out of 10 times, maybe 9 out of 10 times. So I really think he runs through Austin Lane here. I think he gets it done in round 1, and I wouldn't mind seeing what that prop looks like for Baraniewski to try to take it that way either. But give me Baraniewski round 1 knockout. All right, moving over to a welterweight class now. We got Michael Venom Page coming in at -185, going up against Sam Patterson, who comes in at +160. Now, Michael Page is on a 2-fight winning streak. He is 4-1 in his last 5 fights, 3-1 in the UFC. His only loss coming to Ian Machado Gary in a very close fight. That was a fight where I took Gary as my lock of the night play, and he came through, but Page made it much more difficult than I expected him to. Gary got to his grappling the way that I thought he would, but that fight was 1-1 going into the last round, and Gary, for his life, was holding on to that back position once he got Page's back, and he was able to grind it out and win that fight. But Page has managed to bounce back by getting decision wins over Shara Magomedov and Jared Cannonier. He's been bouncing between 170 and 185 pounds as well. You see his grappling not looking as good at 185 pounds, which is why Jared Cannonier was able to get him down a few times. In the final round, he got held down for about 4 rounds and lost that on all scorecards. And that's kind of been his issue. He's also a few weeks shy of his 39th birthday, something to definitely take into consideration there. But when you see him at his range and fighting his point karate kickboxing style, he's very hard to deal with. He gets into a flow state, his reflexes are still there, his speed is still there, his striking defense is still there. That's why it's so hard for these strikers like Magomedov, Holland, and even Cannonier to try to find success trying to hit this guy. Obviously we know the Douglas Lima knockout where Page was getting back to his feet and Douglas caught him with a shot that he didn't see coming. But for the most part, Page is usually very good in terms of not getting hit clean, and that's why guys really struggle in the striking game with him. If they want to have success, it's about the grappling, right? You want to contain him. You want to get him to the ground. You want to be able to accrue at least 2 rounds of control time and hope that the judges give it to you. But on the feet, usually strikes very well and puts on pretty entertaining performances sometimes. Otherwise, he might be a little bit too cautious, mainly just counter-striking, waiting for his opponents to make mistakes. And I think that's where the UFC has run into issues with Page, because, all credit to Patterson. Obviously, he's on a solid winning streak, looking very good ever since moving to welterweight. But Page should be fighting a higher level name and, somebody closer to a title shot than a guy like Sam Patterson looking to break into title contention. Wins over Sharamagomedov and Jared Cannonier should be giving him either a former champ or somebody that will put him closer to a title shot. But for some reason, he's even voiced it that the UFC doesn't seem to be all that big of a fan of him, hence why he's fighting Sam Patterson on this card, and not even in a co-main event position either, right? Now he's going up against Sam Patterson, who's on a 4-fight winning streak ever since moving up to 170 pounds. He made his UFC debut at 155 pounds against Yanal Ashmouz and got absolutely starched that night, got put away in a very nasty fashion. It was one of the nastier knockout losses we've ever seen. Patterson took enough time away, put on the muscle that he needed to go to 170 pounds, and he's gone out there and finished 4 straight opponents in the first round, including that nasty knockout win that he had over Trey Waters last time. The one that really stands out to me is the knockout win that he has over Danny Barlow. That was one where I expected Barlow's striking edge to really cause Patterson some issues, especially with the power that Barlow presented. But Patterson utilized Barlow's aggressiveness against him, clipped him with a big shot, and eventually TKO'd him. And that was a big, big win for Sam Patterson. We've seen in certain fights, especially in his first 2 fights during this run that he's on, that he leans on his grappling. His long, lanky frame usually helps him slap on chokes that are very hard for a lot of opponents to defend, hence why he's been able to get those wins over Johan Lainez and Kiefer Crosby. I believe he's a BJJ black belt, and I like when he showcases his BJJ, but it seems like his durability is a kind of thing of the past now, especially with him at 170 pounds, probably carrying more water weight, carrying a little bit more water in his brain as well to try to keep him conscious whenever he gets hit with these big shots. And he's very skilled. He's very dangerous. And he's still only 29 years old. Very fun striker, a guy that used to deal with a lot of wrestlers back in the day before coming to the UFC, but his lanky frame would cause him a lot of problems. He'd obviously be able to catch some of these guys in guillotines as well, and he's been able to force those guys to tap out as well. But now with his confidence sky high and fighting a high-level name like Michael Page, we'll see if he can really break through to the next level. Unfortunately for him, I don't think so. Unless he goes to a wrestler-heavy approach, which I don't think will be all that effective. He's a good BJJ specialist, but I don't believe all's too much in his wrestling game. I think Page will be able to defend most of the takedowns coming his way from Patterson. I think we'll see Page utilize his usual range striking game, his counter-striking game, and I think that leads to him clipping Patterson here pretty badly, and I think he actually ends up putting him away here. Frame-wise, both guys 6'3". Page only has a 1-inch reach advantage. So, Page is normally a guy that has a decent strike height and reach advantage over his opponents. So I wonder if that lack of advantage in this matchup won't allow him to be as effective from range as he normally is. But I still feel he's going to be the faster fighter and technically superior striker, which should lead to him countering Patterson effectively here. And if he can keep this fight upright, I think Patterson's going to have a lot of trouble trying to land cleanly on Page, and that should lead to Page again, probably gets the decision, but in terms of a prediction, I'm going to go by knockout. I think at a certain point, Patterson's going to get frustrated. He's going to make a mistake, and Page will force him to walk onto a big shot, and we see Page get the knockout here. So give me MVP by knockout. All right, next up, we got a featherweight scrap here between UFC newcomer Luke Riley. Actually, not newcomer, sophomore. UFC sophomore Luke Riley coming in at -300, going up against Michael Aswell, who comes in at +250. Now, Riley made his successful UFC debut, I believe, back in November when he got off on Bogdan Grad. Now, that was a fight where he struggled in the first round with his grappling, but then eventually in the second round found a big shot to put Grad away and showcase the power that he possesses. That's kind of how his last Cage Warriors fight went against Teriel Abasov, where he was getting repeatedly taken down, but showcasing good enough defense that he wasn't getting put in bad positions. And then in the second round, it was clear his opponent had gassed themselves out, and Riley was able to land a big shot to put him away. Now, Riley one of the most entertaining and high-level prospects coming out of Cage Warriors. He put on a ton of entertaining fights. Even his fight against Alexander Loof, if you have not watched that fight, I would highly recommend going back to watch it. It was an absolute back-and-forth war where Riley finally got the third round finish there over Loof. He found himself in some bad positions in that fight as well, but his determination and grit really pulled off from that night, and he was able to get the win. This guy's very skilled in the striking game. He has good combinations, good head kicks, very good timing as well, good counter striker. But I feel maybe his hype might be surpassing his skill set. Maybe. The odds kind of make me feel that way. Obviously, we'll talk about how I see this fight actually going down once I get past the Aswell background as well. But he is a fun fighter, but not a guy I see making it into a championship level type of guy. I think he's kind of going to be, Paddy Pimblett level. Obviously, I believe he's a training partner of Paddy. Maybe not even earn himself a title shot, right? Lightweight is a very deep division. If he gets the UFC push, though, and they give him the right path to get to a title fight, sure, maybe he gets it. But, some of those top 10 guys are going to be tough for him to deal with, especially with how hittable he can be at times and some of the grappling holds in his game that better grapplers with good cardio could potentially expose in him. But in terms of an entertaining fighter, he has a big following as well, so I'm sure the crowd is going to be rocking whenever they see him walk out and obviously fight. But he's a fun fighter, but striking is probably the best part of his game. Now he's going up against a fellow striker here in Michael Aswell, who produced a big knockout win over Lucas Almeida last time around in his first fight where he got a full training camp with the UFC. Now he made his UFC debut up a weight class, short notice, against Balaji Oki, and he had a pretty good first round outstriking the power punching style of Oki. But then it seemed like the size and power and athleticism advantage of Oki really started to come through, and he was starting to chop away at Aswell, and Oki won the next 2 rounds to win that fight on the scorecards. But the durability on Aswell, very high level. He ate some big shots and didn't really flinch at a lot of those shots. And his style is just very basic. Now, I mean this respectfully as much as possible, because that style is very straightforward. He sticks with the jab cross. That's usually his form of attack, but he stays so consistent with it that it really frustrates his opponents. He does a good job in terms of badgering the nose of his opponent, staying on the gas, staying on the pressure, fighting the same way from minute 1 to minute 15. What I've kind of hampered on him for in the past, especially going into his Contender Series fight against Bogdan Grad, is that he needs to throw with a little bit more power. He has a few knockout wins on his record, but the lack of power he's throwing with can be outdone by grapplers and by heavier punchers, similar to Danny Silva, who I talked about earlier on the card. But again, that knockout win against Lucas Almeida is a step in the right direction. The asterisk beside that fight, though, is I believe there was an injury Almeida was going into that fight with, so maybe that compromised him a little bit. So I'm going to put an asterisk beside that. But Aswell is a solid fighter, and confidence must be sky high right now, especially considering what his 4-ounce Fight Club team is doing right now. You got Joshua Van, who's the flyweight champion. You got Alden Korea, who's absolutely been killing it as of late. Now Aswell wants to join the success of the team, and he sees this opportunity against Luke Riley to be his coming out party, especially with the platform that he's been given in this co-main event slot. Grappling wise, nothing special. He has good enough defense to keep this fight striking, which is often where he'll look to try to keep fights and pick apart his opponents and utilize his output to get the better of them. But he's a solid, efficient, reliable fighter. Now here against Luke Riley, it seems like this is a spot that the UFC is trying to set up Luke Riley to get a big win in front of the hometown crowd. But Aswell could make this a fight. Aswell is a gamer. I would put Aswell better than Alexander Loof, and we saw how close Loof was able to upsetting Luke Riley that night. Riley's hittable. If Aswell has started working on his knockout power and throwing with a little bit more emphasis, it's possible he can land that big shot to put Riley on wobbly legs as well. Frame-wise, Riley only has a 1-inch height advantage. They have the same reach at 69 inches. But this will be a competitive battle, much more competitive than minus 300 indicates. This is one of those spots where I'm going to keep my eye on the odds, and if that line continues to widen, Aswell may not be a bad sprinkle because of how competitive he can make this fight. I don't see Riley putting him away. I've seen Aswell eat big shots from bigger power punchers. I expect this just to be a battle through and through between these guys where they just go at it, both guys landing big shots, and once this hit the scorecards, it could be either guy's fight. So I'd put Riley closer to maybe minus 150, minus 185 in this spot. And it would not at all surprise me if Aswell pulls off the upset. But I still find myself on the Riley side. I think he ends up landing more effective damage. I think he mixes in some elbows and some knees. Maybe he cuts as well, and he's able to get some optics to look in his favor. And then obviously having the hometown crowd and hometown scoring, whatever you guys want to take from that, in his favor probably leans him as well. But at minus 300, I would not take that type of chalk at high-level confidence. So again, final prediction for that is going to be Luke Riley by decision. All right, main event now. Featherweight #1 contender matchup. We got Movsar Evloev coming in at minus 225 going up against Lerone Murphy, who comes in at plus 190. Now, Evloev, 19-0. His biggest enemy has been injuries and visa issues and staying active. The last time he competed was December of 2024 when he went up against former bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling. Started off slow, but really picked it up in the second and third rounds and ended up grinding that fight out to get the win. He even has a win over Diego Lopez, who has fought for the title twice now, mainly having to do with Lopez's popularity and obviously Lopez fighting, as often as he does. But Evloev should have already fought for a title. Like after he beat Allen, he probably should have gotten a title shot then. But again, not the most entertaining fighter. Obviously, grapple heavy, keeps a lot of pressure, keeps his opponents on their back foot, chain wrestles, re-wrestles, mat returns. This guy does it all. And he has a high-level cardio game as well, right? This guy just constantly goes out there and keeps his foot on the gas, and that often leads to him breaking his opponents. His striking is obviously the weaker part of his game, but it's something that helps him mask his takedowns and his takedown entries. And I think that's one aspect of his game I think we'll see him continue to improve upon. Obviously, training at American Top Team and all the other gyms that he's been at, those guys will round out this guy's skill set enough so that he can be an absolute menace in terms of hiding his takedown attempts and takedown entries. And then once he gets that body lock, once he gets that back ride, he's very hard to get off of you, and he's usually keeping that pressure on and breaking his opponents down. I love everything about this guy's game. Again, he's not the most entertaining fighter, but for some reason, I'm just compelled to really like his style. He also landed this is actually something else to take into consideration. If you look at the UFC stats page of Evloev against Sterling, you'll see that he only landed 8 significant strikes. But when you look into it more, he landed a total of 136 strikes. For some reason, the statisticians over there at UFC Stats do not take ground strikes into consideration as significant strikes. I would ask Aljamain Sterling whether those strikes hurt or not, right? I'm sure not all 136 of them were significant, but definitely more than 8 of them were significant, right? So definitely something else to take into consideration if you're just going off of significant strikes. He gets off on a lot of damage when he gets opponents to the ground and does a great job in terms of keeping them there as well. Now he's going up against hometown underdog here, Lerone Murphy, who looked, well, I won't say he looked fantastic, but he provided a fantastic knockout at the dismay of Aaron Pico last time around. So that was a fight where Lerone Murphy stepped in on short notice for Movsar Evloev, who was supposed to take on Aaron Pico that night. Murphy steps in on super short notice, and he ends up landing a spinning back elbow that puts Aaron Pico clean out. It was one of the nastier knockouts that we saw last year, but it was perfectly timed, perfectly placed, and showcased the veteran skill and IQ of Lerone Murphy. That fight, Pico looked like he was very tense. I don't know if it was the moment that got to him, the hype that got to him, whatever it was, but he was just very tense, very much just walking Murphy down, trying to land big shots, looking for takedown openings, and that's what led allowed Murphy to walk Pico into that spinning back elbow to put Pico clean out. Murphy, very well-rounded. He has lost rounds to guys like Edson Barboza, to Josh Emmett, even Dan Ige. I believe that Dan Ige fight was 1-1 going into the final round, and Ige had a pretty dominant position at the ending of that, at some point in that third round. But the awareness from Murphy to work out of that position, to reverse the position, very high-level trait of him there to get that top position, get out of that bad spot, and then that was enough for him to edge out that win there. But, he's 17-0-1, but he's not going out there and just blowing these guys out of the water. He's doing enough. He's doing enough to clearly win fights, but he's not what you would think a 17-0-1 fighter looks like. He's very good. he probably should have deserved a title shot by now as well. He's headlined a few fight nights for the UFC. Fun fighter in spurts, but I feel like, the Gabriel Santos fight was a very close fight that he won by split decision. Probably could have gone the other way as well. But this is his first time fighting a guy clearly in his prime, has the UFC experience as well, and has the athleticism to cause Lerone Murphy some issues. So, how I see this fight going down. I think Evloev will get to his grappling. I think he'll wear Murphy down. I think people will read into Murphy knocking out Pico a little bit too much, and they'll probably start to play him and say, hey, he's going to knock Evloev out too. But I think Evloev won't be as tense. I don't think he'll be as wound up as Aaron Pico was, and he'll let his game flow a little bit more, and that will lead to Evloev landing those takedowns, getting those takedown positions, really wearing Murphy down, and I think we'll see this fight start to get wider and wider in favor of Evloev as Murphy starts to slow down, as he starts questioning himself in terms of the takedowns that he keeps getting taken down with, the mat returns and all that stuff. I just think Evloev is too well-rounded. I think he's, I'd say Lerone Murphy is a little bit more well-rounded, but I think Evloev is not that far behind him, but he's way ahead of him in terms of the grappling, and that's where I think this fight is going to be dictated the most. So, in terms of an official prediction, we're going to go Movsar Evloev here. I don't mind him roughly around this minus 220-ish line he's at. I'm expecting we might see some Murphy love come in later on this week, so I'll sit back and see how that looks. But I like Evloev here. I don't mind passing on him if I don't get the number that I want, but I still think he wins this pretty decisively, and I think he does it on the scorecards, and I cannot wait to eventually see Movsar Evloev against Alexander Volkanovski, hopefully later on this year. There you guys go. Full UFC London breakdown, going over almost an hour and 15 minutes breaking down this card for you guys. I'm getting really passionate about these breakdowns, guys. I really, want to get into it. In terms of how I've been doing track-wise, absolutely shit in the bed this year. It has not been a good run for your boy. I think I'm like 1-6 on UFC events this year. Lock of the Night play is not doing that great. But let's recap last weekend. Let's try to get back on track, but we got to face the facts of what last weekend looked like as well. So we'll start off with Cage Warriors 201, which went down Friday morning. We go 0-4. We get reverse swept there. Dar Ward, plus 135. I really expected him to be a little bit more competitive with Rowan Crocker, but Crocker just seemed to be too strong for Ward. He was able to submit him pretty quickly. Leon Aliu, I was surprised he was plus 1100. He was kind of like a fighter like Konstantinos Antelis, big punching power, had some decent wrestling. I thought for as long as that fight would last, it would be a bit of a war and we'd get some big pocket exchanges that could potentially lead to Aliu landing a big shot. We only took a 0.25 unit shot on that. That ended up crumbling, and I think Aliu even got carried out of the cage that night. Nasty knockout from Antelis. But again, plus 1100, had to take a little bit of a shot there. Then the lock of the night play, Jake McHugh getting knocked out by Matthew Elliott. I did not see that coming. And I got a horrible number on McHugh as well. When I studied that fight, minus 135 was the line on McHugh. Then he jumped to minus 170, which is when I jumped on it, assuming that line would get even wider. Then he dropped back down to about minus 120, minus 130. But regardless, Elliott gets the big knockout win there for McHugh. I thought McHugh would be a little bit more defensively responsible. I thought he'd find better ways to get engaged in the grappling realm, but he had no answer for the physically superior Elliott, who was able to get the knockout that night. So we crashed there. And then our parlay as well. Very surprised that a high-level prospect like Damian McHugh gets caught in a heel hook, for God's sakes. I thought he was going to crush this kid, and he was doing pretty well up until that point that he got his heel snatched up. But goddamn, that was a horrible spot. That was, for me, was a free square to try to get better odds on Aiden Lee. And Lee went out there, did his thing, got the submission victory over Englisson Delara. But it was McGugan. Very surprised that he ended up getting submitted the way that he did. So we, again, reverse swept there, minus 7.81 units. Absolutely disgusting. Then we move on to the one bright spot that I had for the weekend. LFA 228, dog hunting out there and absolutely killed it. We'll go top to bottom here. Our dog of the night play was Benjamin Orozco, plus 275 against Jacoby Jones. I've been following Orozco for a long time. I knew what kind of dog this guy was. I knew even though he had losses to, tough outs like Anthony Orozco and Richie Lewis, that he could still go out there and beat a guy like Jacoby Jones. Thankfully, his durability held up because he ate some big shots, but I know that's kind of his style. Once he was able to get through that damage, once he got to the grappling with Jones, I knew he was going to be able to get that back and get the submission, hence why we cashed big on him there at plus 275. And shout out to Benny Orozco. Shouted me out on his IG page, came to the LFA breakdown video and dropped a comment there as well, saying I know game. You know your boy knows game. Even though it's not going that great this year for your boy, I know where I'm watching at least. Now we just got to get some bounces to go our way. Then we got Andrew Stewart, who was able to get the knockout win over Christopher Ewart. Big win there at plus 113. Alexander Savicheva, I thought that was a snipe of a play at plus 140. Knew it was going to be a striking battle. Knew Hernandez was going to try to grapple, but I knew she would not be successful with it. And Savicheva picked her apart and won that fight cleanly. And we cashed a plus 140 dog there. And then our totals. Very surprised that none of these totals ended up hitting. Burkholder's submission defense held up better than it did, so we don't get the under 1.5 there. I thought Timoteo's durability will hold up better. You know, he went 15 minutes with Uran Satibaldiev, went 15 minutes with Joe Taylor, and Lorenz just lands one big shot and Timoteo goes down. But we took a small shot on it at 0.59 units because of the layoff that Timoteo was coming off of. But regardless, the over 1.5 does not cash there. And then the under 1.5 in the Amari Sengun Savan and Carlos Tardio fight does not end up hitting. Amari not looking as good as I expected him to look. Actually ends up losing as a big favorite. So yeah, the totals didn't really go our way that night. So we end up plus 4 units for that card. Happy about that. But again, that was really the only shining light for this weekend. Then we moved over to Cage Warriors 202 Saturday morning. Pretty much broke even on that card, minus 0.34 units. Let's go top to bottom again. Jack McLaughlin goes out there and does exactly what I thought he would do. Get the fight to the ground against Ramon Costa, get the win there. We cashed minus 110. Sheldon Ryan goes out there, out-grapples Nathaniel Woods, cashes us a minus 155. Sam Kelly, I got, I was writing him off before. He pulls off the win last time, but then this time around can't get it done against Piotr Machedi. He loses there, minus 1.26 units there. Oliver Terrell, our lock of the night play, was seconds away from getting the finish in the first round. The bell saves Alexis Sarmandidis, and Sarmandidis starts to take over in rounds 2 and 3. It seems like Terrell almost gassed himself out trying to finish Sarmandidis in that first round, and he ends up fumbling the bag for us. Shout out to Sarmandidis for pulling off the upset, and he gets the win. I should have freaking known that I should have gone with Chris Morris as my lock of the night play, who got the job done. I think in the second fight of the night, absolutely demolishing Mariusz Mikolajewski. But we decided to just throw him into a parlay with Joe Fields, who absolutely killed Iago Silva as well. That cashes a minus 103 parlay for us. Getting back to the money lines, Jordan Staines goes out there. It seems like a setup match. Marcelo Marquez, absolutely amazing on LFA Brazil, but it seems like this was a fight set up for him to lose. There was a lot of love coming in on Marquez as a big dog. Pushed Staines down to minus 175. We were able to cash that. Very happy about that. Kiro Singh Sahota, just the lack of power really causes him issues in terms of getting wins over guys that can land big shots on him. He's a skilled striker, but he just doesn't throw enough sting on his shots anymore, and I think that's what caused him the loss against Wilson. And then the other guy that I was considering as a lock of the night play, Ewan Davies, gets the win over Michael Pagani in a very close fight. I would have made Davies my lock of the night play had he not been coming off of an extended layoff, but he still cashes us 2 units there. Very happy about that. We talked about the parlay already, where we cashed 2.02 units on Fields and Morris. The under 1.5 in Cullen Neto does not come through for us at plus 105. Very surprised that Cullen couldn't get the guy out of there. Seems like he's settling into not being an early finisher anymore, trying to round out his skills and have a good enough gas tank to go 15 minutes if he needs to. And then lastly, again, limits kept me from going even deeper on this one. But if there was going to be any lock of the night play that we can get a significant amount of money on, it would have been this under right here with Nathan Fletcher and Thiago Silva. Under 1.5, I was able to get minus 180. Fletcher is a quick finisher. All of Thiago Silva's losses, I think 7 or 8 of them now, all came under 1.5 rounds by submission. So we knew exactly what was going to happen there. So we were able to cash that. But again, all in all, break even Cage Warriors 202, minus 0.34 units. Still surprised that Oliver Terrell fumbled the bag there. I think that's the one. I think Sam Kelly is the one that I regret the most. But very bummed that Terrell couldn't get us over the line there. And then we move over to the UFC card. Atrocious there as well. Let's go top to bottom. Elijah Smith goes out there and gets the club and sub over Su Young Yu. Maybe should have been the lock of the night play, but very impressive performance from him there. We took a little bit of a gamble on Montserrat Rendon. She looked like she did not respect Bia Mesquita striking at all. She was just throwing weird offense, consistent offense out there, and I think she thought that would be her way to win that fight, but she did not expect Mesquita to land as accurately and as with as much power as Mesquita did, and that obviously caused Rendon to be wobbled. Mesquita takes her to the ground, and before we know it, that fight's done with. So plus 420, Sprinkle doesn't end up coming through. Sam Hughes looked worse than she did in the first fight against Pietro Rodriguez. So shout out to everybody that held their trust in Rodriguez. I really thought Hughes made better improvements than Rodriguez, but Rodriguez came in with a game plan. She stuck to it and absolutely squashed Hughes. We lose out on Sam Hughes, who I believe was the lock or the dog of the night play for us. Then Amanda Lemos has a solid start, but unable to keep it up in the second and third rounds. She gets outgrounded by Jillian Robertson, loses at plus 170. Our lock of the night play, Umar C, minus 208 against Iwan Kutalaba. C closed at minus 300. And for him to go out by getting guillotined by Iwan fucking Kutalaba, mind-blowing. That's just kind of the year that we're having with lock of the night plays. Kutalaba guillotining Umar C. That guy is on my blacklist officially for good. I can handle him ending up on bottom at the beginning of the fight, but then to get guillotined by Kutalaba as he's reversing position, bonehead move. He has shown much better skills on the regional scene before coming to the UFC. Even some UFC wins. I don't know how he got caught by Kutalaba there, but he ends up fumbling the bag for us as the lock of the night play. Brad Tavares looked like absolute dog shit. Never betting him again either. Can't believe he went out there the way that he did against Eric Anders, repeatedly getting hurt, making bonehead decisions even after hurting Anders. Brad Tavares should just hang it up as well. Hector Sosa was one of the contenders for a lock of the night play for me. He goes out there, has a war against Luan Lacerda. He was, I believe, the second biggest play that we had on the card. He comes through for us. And I was very surprised that the commentators were making that fight sound a lot closer than it actually was. Like, at most, you maybe give Lacerda round 1, but I really thought Sosa clearly won rounds 2 and 3, stopped the takedowns. Even though he was the one backing up most of the time, he was the one landing bigger damage and more often. Lacerda was not landing damage as often, so I thought it was clear that Sosa was going to get the win once that fight hit the scorecards. Thankfully, he came through for us. Josh Emmett, plus 475, just seemed very wide to me. His durability seemed to be good enough since the last time he had got knocked out, but Vallejo showed him no respect at all, walked him down, threw big shots, and eventually got him out of there. So we take the loss there on Emmett. We also had a little bit of a shot on the over 3.5 in that fight. Again, Vallejos usually gets very comfortable in spots, but it seemed like he was determined in his first main event to go out there and show off, and he did. Got the quick knockout win there, so we crash on the over 3.5. We took a little bit of a sprinkle on the Petrino by submission prop. Credit to Steven Asplund in terms of working on his defensive grappling to ensure that he didn't get stuck on bottom. So we take a bit of an L on the plus 280 submission prop. And then we do end things off with a cash on our parlay here with Vitor Petrino getting the win over Steven Asplund. Again, played out closer than I expected it to, but glad that he was still able to get the win. And then another one that played out a lot closer than I expected it to. Charles Johnson gets the win over Bruno Silva to help us cash that parlay. Maybe he deserved to lose that fight, but regardless, he gets the win. I'll take those types of bounces considering how the year is going so far. So I'll take that win for what it is. But all in all, for UFC Vegas 114, we're down minus 7.43 units, minus 40% ROI. Again, not a great run to start off the year. We've had some glimpses of good moments, right? The Mario Bautista and Vinicius Oliveira card was the best card that we've had for UFC. LFA, we've had some gleaming moments as well. But UFC, I really got to dial that shit in. So hopefully we can get back on the winning track this weekend. And reminder, we also have PFL Madrid and Cage Warriors 203, which I believe will be going down at the same time. So I'm going to have to duo screen that, I think, on Friday. I'll have the PFL breakdowns probably for you guys on Wednesday if they already have the odds out. Otherwise, Thursday. But Thursday for sure is also want to have the Cage Warriors 203 breakdowns out. So stay tuned for all that good stuff. All right. This might be the longest episode I've done in a very long time, but felt pretty convicted about a lot of those breakdowns. So I wanted to make sure that I got to all the details. Yeah, I'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday, for the Tuesday live stream, 8 p.m. Eastern to 9 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys tune in for that. Otherwise, yeah, make sure you guys enjoy the rest of the content. Hit that like and subscribe below. Hit that subscribe. I'm just about 10 subscribers away from 9,500. Help your boy achieve that milestone. Hit that subscribe if you haven't already. All right, I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.